Welcome to Out of the Question, a podcast that looks behind some common questions and uncovers the question behind the question while providing real solutions for biblical world and life view. Your host is Andrea Schwartz, a teacher and mentor and founder of the Chalcedon Teacher Training Institute.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Out of the Question podcast. Matthew 25 reads in part, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' The king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" Too often, when people consider what they could or should be focusing on regarding seeking the kingdom of God, their attention moves to politics or some current issue that has lots of attention given in various media. But how many take to heart the description of what our King values in terms of what is at the top of his list? Recently, I had the opportunity to hear in person an update from two missionaries who serve in rural Guatemala. What struck me the most about their story and the work they do is how very ordinary they are as people. And I don't mean this as an insult. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily pick them out in a crowd, nor would you find their day-to-day lives very exciting. Yet, in their ordinary lives, I got to see how they are doing truly extraordinary work. Their ministry is very much in line with the passage of Matthew 25. Carly Reuter and her husband Jeff have been serving in Guatemala since 2017. Carly used to be an emergency room nurse in Colorado, and Jeff worked with his family's excavation company. Carly, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So how did two Coloradans, and I had to look it up, how you refer to people from Colorado. It's not Coloradians, it's Coloradans. So how did two end up in Central America? Or to put it another way, how did two ordinary people answer God's call to further the kingdom of God?
I would love to share about that. I think your introduction was perfect in calling us ordinary because we felt and know that we are just that. We were an ordinary couple dating and decided to go on a church mission trip. And this was a new church to our hometown, and it was the first mission trip the church had ever done. We spent a week in Guatemala. We spent some time at a children's home. It was my husband's first opportunity abroad, the reason why he got his passport. And he had always said that he loves supporting missions while we send missionaries, but he is not one himself. And we spent that week there. And the following year, our church said, "Would you like to lead the next trip?" And we had just gotten married. We said on that last trip, we were the youngest people on that trip. So maybe a grown-up, somebody older and wiser should lead this group, and we actually declined. But we later found out that the group was not going to go because there was nobody to lead. So we decided that we were better than nobody, and we agreed to lead when we were told that all we had to do was get the group through the airport, a group of adults through the airport, and once we were in Guatemala, the missionaries there would take over.
So you were just going to be administrative people?
Yes, that was our only
or so
job.
you thought.
Yes. That was our only job, was just to schedule some plane tickets and get everybody through customs. And then Guatemala side would be done by the organization. And 2 to 3 weeks before we were to depart, plane tickets already purchased, we found out that we could no longer go with this organization. It had fallen through. The church decided it was wise to part ways with this organization. But then they said, well, we don't want to cancel it. Maybe there's something that you can do instead.
So you got, maybe we're off the hook, but
yeah, like, okay, it's not happening. But instead, our fears had come true. Here we were in the middle of the night, Googling where in the world to take a group of adults to Guatemala. We had no place to sleep, no place to serve, no transportation. Once we got out of the airport, nothing booked, and no idea what to do. So we were just internet researching, praying, and in our kitchen in Colorado, we had a painting on the wall, a print that we had purchased on that first trip to Guatemala. We were told that the original had been painted by a missionary and her prints were supporting her mission. We had no idea who this missionary was, but we did, for the first time that night, notice at the very bottom of the print in small text, there was a website. So we Googled, in desperate measures, we Googled that website, and the next day we were on the phone with a couple, George and Vonda Cisneros. We learned Vonda was the artist of our painting, and George said, you know what? I hear the desperation in your voice, and we will take care of your team. We will host you for the week and take care of everything. So 3 weeks later, we were in the village of El Rosario. Well, El Rosario.
Let me stop you for a second.
Of course.
Did you know what you were going to do when you got there?
No.
Oh, okay.
We had maintained a connection with a children's home that we were going to do some volunteering there. But as far as how we were going to help George said, I'm going to bring you through the village, do some home visits, and plug you into some work there, but no real specifics. So we were just trusting God with that. And when we got to El Rosario, we were able to do numerous home visits, house to house, and just sit with people and pray with them. And it didn't take long, but the people of this rural indigenous village in Guatemala caught our hearts, and God just really laid it on both of our hearts that we wanted to do something more within this village. And being a nurse, George and Vonda asked me specifically if I had any insight on solving a crisis within this village, which was over 25% of all the registered deaths were infants, and over 80% of the children are malnourished. We also found that a third of childhood deaths were from undernutrition, and that had to do with their susceptibility to disease, most of which were preventable diseases, such as waterborne illness and lung disease. Mamas tie their babies to their backs and cook on an open fire inside an unventilated kitchen hut. So breathing in that smoke while their mama's cooking is causing pneumonia. And when they're already undernourished, it makes them just that much more susceptible to pneumonia that's deadly. And so Jeff and I instantly saw that there was this need for public health, and his background in construction went along really well with this crisis in nutrition. So we decided to partner with them and just kind of create a program, but while living in Colorado. And we would just visit often and just try to consult and help them. So we started coming more and more and more. And then as the trips continued, George and Vonda and Jeff and I had a heart-to-heart, and we saw that if this was really going to take off and make a lasting difference, it was going to take somebody moving down there and tackling it full time. Jeff and I said that we would start praying for that person, and that person would be us. And after lots of prayer, it was a Sunday afternoon, Jeff said, I think it's actually us. I think we need to move down there and just see this through full time.
So I'm sure what you encountered was like widespread. You weren't talking an isolated 2 or 3 families. Can you give me some idea of the degree to which El Rosario had this problem and how many families you were potentially talking about?
Yeah, so within the indigenous villages, the 8 out of 10 children are considered chronically malnourished. We consistently encountered families that had lost infants to malnutrition. We consistently encountered families that had lost children to waterborne illness.
Are we talking hundreds of people? Are we talking thousands of people? What's the magnitude of just what you saw?
Well, in El Rosario, it's a population of 5,000 people. In the neighboring village that we were doing a lot of work with, a population of 10,000 people. And the more community assessments we did, there was about an 8-village area that was kind of within this rural area that was under-resourced, not much healthcare, chronic malnutrition, and we're talking about 50,000 people in population among all 8 villages. And data within these local government clinics have found that a fourth of all registered deaths were infants. So that's pretty significant when you compare that to national data.
Oh, yeah. And compared to the U.S., for example, we would consider that horrendous. Weren't you and Jeff overwhelmed with the magnitude of what had to take place there, or what kind of a dent you could even possibly make?
Yeah, I think in general, we were overwhelmed with all of the health crisis too. So looking back and now knowing what our current mission is, I think it's easy to say we're focused on the babies. But when we first started going down, being a nurse, I was overwhelmed by all of the diabetes, the adults with lung disease, just people would line up and start knocking on the door. Soon people within the community learned which was our bedroom window and would actually knock on the window during sleeping hours. So I was overwhelmed by the medical need. And some local missionaries gave us the wise advice that if we're going to make an impact, we need to focus and have a specialty, because instead we'll just be a mile wide, an inch deep, and not make a true lasting impact, and really just get burned out. And so through countless home visits, talking with government clinic nurses, we were refocused to remind ourselves that the need is in this malnutrition. The crisis is in this malnutrition and the next generation. And so by focusing on that, it helped it feel less overwhelming, but of course it was crippling. But I think what I always came back to is that our God is sovereign. He has a plan for these babies. He has a plan to revive these babies to health. If I quit or go, I'm not going to get in the way of his plan. I would just miss out on the blessing of being a part of it. The blessing of obedience. He would just use someone else to bring relief to these people. And so I felt so privileged to just be a part of it. And we said, you know what, we're going to do this for a year. We're going to try to figure out a program and do it for a year. But at the year mark, instead of buying plane tickets home, we bought land and created a Guatemalan nonprofit organization that would be the owning name on the land. And then Jeff gathered 25 local men without work, and together they built the clinic that we call Casa Tibito today.
So originally, I think when I looked on your website, you were called Ordinary Nurses. So that's right. Kind of where I got the ordinary. If people thought, wow, she just called them ordinary. You called yourself ordinary.
Yes, we did. Absolutely. So many of our initial trips was me taking nurses that I worked with. A lot of my family members are nurses, and we just kept going down. And we were coming alongside George and Bonda, who was organizations called Ordinary Missionaries. So we're the ordinary nurses coming alongside them, and it was so fitting. But as the organization grew and it became, this building built by Guatemalans, and then we were able to send 2 local gals to nursing school and hire a Guatemalan pediatrician and hire a Guatemalan psychologist and hire 2 crews of local men to be full-time construction. It became so Guatemalan-led, which was our dream. It just felt like it needed to be named by Guatemalans. And that's when the renaming happened. And it's in honor, actually, of one of the first babies to ever come to the clinic.
Tell that story, because I love that story.
Absolutely. So when we were kind of in that period of like, okay, we are here for the babies. We do need to refocus, but like God, like show us how to do that. It is overwhelming. There was a knock on our door, and it was a mama from that village over of 10,000 people. She unwrapped the woven textile blankets to reveal this tiny little baby, 3 months old and only 5 pounds.
Wow.
I could see every bone in his face, all of his ribs. I still remember that his cry didn't make noise. He was so dehydrated. It was just this like silent scream. And we rushed him to a hospital because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm a nurse, but this baby needs a doctor. Let's take him to a hospital. And we went through a hospital, and they're like, you know what? It's overcrowded. This baby is very malnourished. He would just get an illness from here. Like, she's like, I was just discharged from that one, so we can't go to that one. And really, we ended up not having anywhere to go. And we ended up right back in the village. And I was like, okay, well, at least we had some lab work. We kind of knew where his electrolytes were, and decided just to feed him by an eyedropper because he didn't have the strength to take a bottle. And so all night long, drop by drop, we just watched his mama slowly keep her baby alive. And
so you didn't do the eyedropper. You had her do the eyedropper.
Yeah, that's right. And at this point, she had not named her baby. She had lost other children to malnutrition. And as kind of a coping mechanism we have learned over the years, this is kind of a way mamas are able to kind of set themselves apart maybe, but she had not named her baby. And we just said, every life has value. And that's one way to show value is to give this baby a name. And in the name of Jesus, he's going to live. Let's give him a name. And she's like, well, if this baby lives, it's because he's been raised from the dead. So let's name him after someone that's been raised from the dead. And a local neighbor was with us, and he said, well, Peter raised Tabitha from the dead. In Spanish, that's Tabita. But I was like, well, this is a baby boy. But in Spanish, you can change the feminine to the masculine from an A to an O. So Tabita became Tabito that night, and Tabito was named. And to this day, Tabito now is a chubby 6-year-old that likes running to the local store for popsicles and is thriving. He's doing so well. And every time I see him come by the clinic, he's actually just playing with my little 4-year-old on the swing set. And it just felt like a miracle that I could watch him playing like that, to think that he might not even be alive. And then we knew in that moment we existed for babies like Tabito. To think that 80% of the children in rural Guatemala are chronically malnourished can just be overwhelming. Like, where do we even start? But instead, we're like, you know what? Let's exist for the babies that only have days to live. Her own family, Tabito's own family, told the mama, just let him die at home. Don't go there. Don't go to that other village. Don't knock on their door. And she still tells us, my own family told me that, but there's a little bit of hope left in me that I came and knocked on your door. And so we exist for those mamas that want to just keep fighting and give those babies life. And so we have partnered with all 8 government clinics, and all 8 of those clinics are pretty under-resourced. At one point, they were using, several of them were using like a hook, like you would see to weigh luggage on the back of a diaper to weigh the babies. And so we were able to remodel a lot of them and get the locking doors for them, and then give them the appropriate medical equipment, like a proper scale. And then through this partnership, we say, if you find a baby so malnourished that you would actually need to remove them from the home or send them to a center because they're going to die, instead of doing that, would you formally refer them to our center, to Casa Tabito? And so now, because they're screening all these children, the most severely malnourished, they send to Casa Tabito.
I'm sure a natural question will come up to people who are listening. Are most of these women single moms, or are we talking about intact families?
It's both. I would say actually most would probably have a spouse and several other children. We do have a fairly large percentage of single moms too, but there's families in these rural areas where the fathers are working so hard, but they're making $1 to $2 a day.
I see.
And when you have 4 or 5 children, Guatemala has one of the lowest median ages in the world. In our specific department, the latest data I got actually last week said 17% of the population in our department is less than 5 years old. So there's a lot of children, and these dads are working very hard. Our department's actually known for the work ethic of these dads, but to just make a few dollars a day, you can't feed all your children. It's really hard to get ahead. And then these mamas, for varying reasons that I could get into, are losing their ability to nurse, and they can't afford to buy formula. So then they might start making like this rice water or maybe even just sugar water. But then 90% of the water in this area is contaminated by fecal matter. So then this already undernourished baby is drinking contaminated water and now has parasites, some sort of waterborne illness, depleting them even more so.
Are the moms unable to produce milk because they too don't have good nutrition?
Yes, that is part of it. That is a huge factor. Part of it is dehydration. A lot of these mamas are living in a state of having like a chronic diarrhea from waterborne illnesses themselves. We treat all the mamas that join our program for parasites. It's pretty rare to find a mama not with parasites when she comes in. Being dehydrated makes it really hard to produce milk. And then on top of it, a lot of these mamas go to a state hospital to have their babies, where the C-section rate is extremely high. And a lot of times recovery happens separate from the baby. And actually, to get into these hospitals for your C-section, you have to bring a can of formula so that they can feed your baby while you're recovering in a different room. And then mamas go home, having not been telling their body that they need to make this milk, and they can't buy more of that formula.
I've talked to other missionaries, and it's not uncommon for missionaries to come back to the States to have their own children. And I know you have 2 daughters. And one of the things they say is that they almost have culture shock in reverse. When they go to a church, for example, and they're going to talk about their mission, and there's a church potluck and how much food gets thrown away and whatever. And I remember reading about one missionary who said he actually got sick to his stomach. He couldn't even participate. And people said, no, have as much as you want. But all he could think of is the radical difference between his mission field and coming back. Do you and your husband experience that?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's definitely some radical differences to be going back and forth. We definitely experience it both ways. Even our little 4-year-old does. We'll feel overwhelmed in a grocery store. But I would say that it was definitely more so that way the first few years.
Okay.
And then the longer we've been out there, the more I also see the incredible value and blessing of America. And I say that because it's so easy to spend time abroad and start being like, oh, and like you think of all the negatives of the United States. And of course there are, but so there are in every country and culture. And what I found that the generosity of people in America is why the clinic is full of medications and full of formula, and why the local staff has the resources they need. And so I'm so thankful for the people in America that are working hard every day. And because of where they were born, they're able to have an income that's able to support Casa Tobito to be where it is. So I have gratitude for America, but of course I do experience that shock as well, because it is a country of excess.
Do the people there, at first, did they receive you well? And on top of it, were they interested in more than just the physical help and the nutritional help? Were they interested in hearing about the Bible and the Lord and things like that?
Yeah, because we were in partnership with a couple that, George and Vonda, the Vonda who painted that painting, they had already been out there at least 6 years before we moved there. And they commuted in and out of this village until they were invited to buy land in the village and build a home there. And the day they moved into that home, Jeff and I were so blessed to move into it as well in their guest apartment. And so we kind of got a fast forward as far as getting to be invited and welcomed into a village pretty quickly. And then because of the medical piece, I was able to form a lot of relationships quickly. And by listening a lot and doing a lot of community-wide health assessments and going in and out of homes and talking to community leaders and hearing that their desire was to help babies and listening to them, because as an ER nurse, I actually at first was resistant to go the pediatric route, but I listened and chose to tackle that alongside the community and help these babies. Our relationship really grew, and it was a local family that decided to sell us their land to build that clinic, and those relationships were forming. And one thing I felt having the experience in the ER is I didn't want to open a place that you just saw them, treated them, and never saw them again. I found it will be really challenging to have a medical mission that allows for discipleship, because you'd rarely see these people again. You'll just see people in and out, new faces all the time. And so the design of our nutrition program is a mama comes in and we commit to stand alongside her for a year as we provide medical care for a year, health classes for a year, but then discipleship for a year. So we're committed to having her do weekly Bible studies, counseling, home visits with discipleship, and the response has been overwhelmingly positive. A lot of these mamas are plugged into the local church, but perhaps because of different theologies, many mamas will say something like, I believe Jesus died on the cross, I just don't believe he died for me. Mm-hmm. And just this feeling of shame or guilt, not being worthy of his love. And so it takes a year to just stand alongside these women and say, you are seen and you're known, and he would have died just for you if you're the only one.
When I heard you talk, I wasn't able to stay and talk to you immediately afterwards. My first thought was, did you speak Spanish before you got down there?
I did, yeah. My minor in college was Spanish alongside nursing school, and I did study abroad in Costa Rica and lived with a family for 6 months that did not speak English, without an English-speaking roommate or anything. And I went to Costa Rican college with Spanish-speaking classmates and teachers, so it was a very good immersion experience. My husband did not, and did a 4-week intensive language program before starting, and then he met with a tutor online every morning at 6, very consistently for several years. And then when he general contracted the building of the clinic with those 25 local men, it really solidified everything and has allowed him to be fluent as well. Fluent to the best of our abilities. We'd never say we're totally fluent.
Do these people, any of them speak English? Or, I mean, I guess they may be learning English, but were any of them English speakers?
Our pediatrician from Guatemala City is fluent in English. Sometimes we'll encounter somebody that does, but for the most part, no. If they speak more than one language, it's because they might speak the indigenous language of Cachiquel in addition to Spanish.
So it must have been hard at first to communicate effectively. I know you said you had an immersion experience, but I know enough about Central and Latin America to know that if you speak Costa Rican Spanish, it's not exactly the same as Guatemalan Spanish or Nicaraguan Spanish. So how much of a language barrier, or was it just they got that you were sincere and you were taking care of their children?
That's a great question. I would say, of course, there were times that we were both so challenged by language, or just kind of feeling overwhelmingly exhausted by speaking in a language where you didn't grow up speaking. And especially when we got into areas when we were working out legal things with the licensing of our clinic, we would need to involve bilingual interpreters to make sure we're really understanding things. As far as local community members, we would often just pray that the Holy Spirit would speak through us, especially when we're praying and discipling. And I just know that God covered that, and they're such a loving, considerate community that they were so patient, didn't laugh.
So is it your hope, or was it your hope originally, that other people would pick up this model and utilize it in other places, that along with helping the people of this area, that Casa Tobito would be a pilot project?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we designed this model, I kind of took the models that I knew were successful, such as there's a nationwide model in America called Nurse Family Partnership, where nurses come into the homes of new mothers till the child is 2 years old. And those consistent weekly home visits where you're providing lactation counseling and empowering the mother to take care of her own baby has phenomenal data in its success. My own mom worked for Nurse Family Partnership for many years when I was growing up. So I was surrounded by that idea. And then Compassion International actually has a baby survivor program where they have mamas of new babies come and take health classes. And so we kind of combined the idea of those kind of models where we wanted it to be outpatient, where we weren't removing the baby from the mama's arms, but watching her revive her own baby through empowerment of education and resources and community around her. And so this model is till the baby is 1 year old. She comes twice a week, one time to see her pediatrician and nurses, and another day to receive health classes and Bible study and just bask in the community of other mothers. Both times in the waiting room, we call it baby stimulation time, where the babies are placed on physical therapy mats and the mamas just have playtime with their babies. We're modeling what it means to stimulate your babies, especially as their brains are growing now that they're being nourished. And in addition to this model, we make sure that all of the babies are living in a healthy home. And so that's where we have my husband kind of started that side, and now we have 2 crews of local men going usually at once, and it makes sure that every house at least has clean water, clean air where they're cooking on a cooking stove, venting the smoke out of the house, and at least cemented floors instead of dirt floors, which is all tied to a lot of health data. And then if it requires it, we'll build them a whole new block house if that's what it takes for them to be living in a healthy place. And then we stick with them until after that 1 year mark, they graduate into a different program that doesn't have as many visits until they're 5. And then this model, I definitely loved the idea of it being replicated. So we were able to mentor now 2 different couples, and they have started this model in different parts of Guatemala. One couple is doing the exact same thing several hours away, and they started a few years ago, and 48 babies have been revived to health, and they are building houses, installing stoves, the exact same model, and they're actually fundraising for their building right now. And it's really exciting to see it happening again somewhere else.
So does this all happen under your Ordinary Nurses program, or they set up their own nonprofits?
They set up their own nonprofit, and we just said we'd be happy to mentor you. So we did consistent Zoom meetings, had them out to our village consistently, and I still talk to them all the time with questions, but it's under their own nonprofit. Yeah.
Did you ever get any pushback from locals, families saying, don't trust these people, you can't trust them, they have ulterior motives? Or did the state ever come in and say they wanted to start regulating you?
Great question. Thankfully, that hasn't been anything we've encountered. As far as the state, we went through all the proper licensure to become licensed provider of primary medical care, and we are a non-governmental organization recognized by Guatemala. And so we're able to have Guatemalan employees with benefits and salaries and all the proper licensure. The state has come by, and it's nothing but good things. Usually it ends with them giving us the names of 4 or 5 babies outside of our area that they'd asked that we'd also take in. As far as local community members, we also have been so grateful and blessed that we haven't had any pushback in that area either. It's usually just word of mouth to sharing that they heard about us and they were wondering if their baby can join. Thankfully, it's been good.
Have you ever had to turn anybody away?
If they meet the criteria for severe malnutrition, no, we've never had to turn anyone away. If we turn them away, it's because they're chubby.
Oh, that's good. Now, I remember when you spoke at the church, you pointed out that by nature, you're really an introvert and you don't really like talking publicly. I'll be honest with you, Carly. I don't believe you. It doesn't seem that way. But on one hand, I know that we all tend to rise to the occasion and move outside our comfort zone. Now that you have two daughters, when you started, you didn't have two daughters. Has this proved a challenge for you?
It motivated me to truly have the clinic and the entire organization sustained by Guatemalans. We always knew that was the right thing to do. But when I had Lucy, I really deeply felt called to motherhood. In a way, everybody's called to it in different ways, and all are beautiful ways. Me specifically, I wanted to spend most of my time with Lucy. And when we were living above a clinic, it means just always being pulled down. There's always a crisis, right? Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want her raised by a different caregiver. And so it really motivated me to get the clinic in a place where it was all Guatemalan led. And so it was actually when Lucy was a baby that she got pretty sick, and we were recommended to go to Guatemala City to meet a specific pediatrician. And they said, she's a pediatrician for diplomats. She's done a residency in the States. I think you'll feel really comfortable with her. And so when I was meeting her, I was just so thrilled by her standard of care and the way she worked. And I think you can pray big and ask big. And so after a lot of praying, I asked her, I said, would you ever consider working for Casa Tabito? And to my surprise, she said, I've always wanted a job where I can share the gospel with my patients. I actually have extended family from that area, and I've always wanted to serve that community. And
wow.
So God provided huge in that way that Dr. Contreras is now on our team and comes to the clinic every Tuesday and is our medical director. And that lifted a huge burden from me. And then around that time, those two gals we sent to nursing school were graduating. And so then they were ready to work full time. And it just really came together where the clinic could be fully run by Guatemalans. And I could kind of take a step back and be with my girls.
So I know you raise funds. I know that the church I attend, you're one of the regular missionaries that's supported. So they're supporting the missionaries, and then they're supporting the work. So do they have a sustaining model at Casa Tabito? Not that you are going to take your hands off it, but they're now motivated to keep it going.
Yeah, so actually our nonprofit, we designed it of a model of another really large organization, and it's called the 100% model. So we were able to speak with now 23 private families, and those 23 families provide all of our overhead costs. So personal support, any type of administrative salary, putting on a fundraiser, paying a CPA, the non-exciting things. Those 23 families cover the overhead, so that if someone were to go on our website or a church decided they wanted to start supporting us, 100% goes right to the clinic. It kind of takes the cynicism that has been kind of happening around charity work, and it can really build the trust back into donating, that it goes right to the clinic and right to the local staff and puts formula and medications on the shelves. It builds homes, and it doesn't sift through any other hands.
Let the people who are listening know how they can find out more about it. What's your website, anything else, or any place that you might direct them?
Absolutely. So our website is casatabito.org. So that's CASA and then TABITO. So casatabito.org. And then our social media, on Instagram, it's at casatabito. We love doing videos, so we post several videos a week, so you can just really see what's happening every day at Casa Tabito if you want to just follow us along and journey with us through prayer. We're so grateful for that.
So one last question. Not everybody is going to go to Guatemala. Not everybody has a medical background or a construction background. Thinking back, obviously you minored in Spanish. I don't even know if you know why you minored in Spanish, but what would you say to people who say, I would really like to do something like this. I'm scared out of my wits. What would be your advice?
I would say that it's really easy to just get into the status quo, you'd say, and say, I'm going to, go to college and get the job and then buy the house. And we were doing that. We're like, okay, next is kids. And that's when all of a sudden we're like, wait, do we need to do it that way? And just taking the time to listen to what the Lord has for you. And it could mean supporting somebody doing this. It could mean starting something right in your community. But doing that, starting that, like start a nonprofit, it's actually exciting. And it could be for something you're so passionate about or move abroad. And it can just start with a little bit of obedience. That's what I've always said, because if I would have been told, if God would have said, I need you to move to Guatemala for 6 years and raise your little girls down there, I probably wouldn't have done it. Yeah. But God just said, hey, can you lead this trip? And then God said, hey, what about just starting a program? And then what about a year? And we committed to a year. Like in God's great mercy, he knew the limitations of my obedience and just revealed a little bit at a time. So instead of thinking of this overwhelming big program organization, like what's just that little baby step of obedience that you can move forward with?
Can you even imagine what your life would be like now if you hadn't done this?
No, I can't. It's so exciting. Like how wonderful that you go with what God has for you. It makes life so fun and exciting. Of course, we had parasites and scabies and, perpetual heartbreak of seeing poverty over and over. But there's a peace that surpasses all understanding when you feel like you're right where God wants you. And so I just can't imagine not having that and just now seeing it through my little girl's eyes and seeing how they get to be a part of this. I'm so grateful that God allowed me to be a part of it.
And I'm guessing that the passage that I started off with in Matthew 25, the least of these, I mean, if you're looking at a 3-month-old baby that probably could fit in the palm of your hand and is less than 5 pounds, In America, we battle over whether abortion should be legal or not. And it's really a rewarding thought to think that there are mothers who care so much that they want to see their babies live, that this isn't like this baby is a burden, this baby is a blessing. And so it undercuts all that other stuff. And there's really a culture there that respects life. And I believe Casa de Pito has had a lot to do with that.
Thank you so much. We're so grateful to be doing that in our little part of the world.
Yes, indeed. Well, listeners, casatobito.org. If you have any questions or you want to find out more, go to the website. She wasn't kidding. There are a lot of videos there. Like I saw some people I knew who were down there last year building a house, and they knew what they were doing because one of them is a contractor here. 9 times out of 10, people say they get much more out of it than they feel that they ever gave. And that sounds like your story as well. Out of the Question podcast at gmail.com is how you reach us. Thanks again, Carly.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Out of the Question. For more information on this and other topics, please visit chalcedon.edu.